I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Dana Steinlage with Choice Solutions.
Great. Thank you, Ellie, and welcome everybody. One of the partners here on our team and co-lead up the sales organization at Choice Solutions. And just on behalf of our team, our company, I want to thank you for taking time to join us today. Anytime we invest and put together an event, we always try to think through and bring forward something that'll be relevant to today, but also for the future, the things that you guys might be working on. And very excited about what Shankay, Oz, Jarian, what they've put together and the information you guys are all going to receive here. Just we've got a spectrum of folks joining us from today from all over the country, and we're appreciative of that. Just for your just for knowledge, most of our team is primarily in the U.S. centrally part of the U.S. and then also in the Southeast with some growth as well as in the Great Lakes region. So we've had the opportunity to work with companies across 46 different states over the last 5 or so years. But again, thank you. We've got a wide range of folks that are joining us today across verticals, across expertise levels, whether it be architects to leading up directors and whatnot. So excited to have you all here. But for those of you who aren't familiar with us, just a quick background on our team, on our company, and why we're in business and how we're maybe a partner to potentially be of service to you in the future. But again, for us, it's all about kind of the user experience with technology and the applications, the desktops, the services that your workforce needs access to, and how they're getting access to it in the most consistent, productive, empowered manner. All the while, as an IT organization, you're working on things for the business to make sure the proper security and control exist. And then obviously, from a business perspective, looking to make sure and be able to attract and retain today's top talent, as well as having engaged employees into what you're doing. All the while, on IT and what you guys are working on behind the scenes under the water, right, is this transformation of your applications, of your infrastructure, of security, everything kind of from traditional IT environments and applications into adopting the right mix of cloud-related services. Whether that be adoption of public cloud, whether that be kind of the private cloud on-prem, a mix of that, as well as, adoption of SaaS applications for your business wherever appropriate. So that transition that you're all working on, again, today, very heavily focused on EUC, the event we're going to be going through. So kind of maybe your traditional on-prem or VDI, and you're making that transition into DaaS and the right combination of some of the newer technologies. That's going to be a lot of focus here today that we'll be sharing information with you guys on. All the while you're dealing with constraints, right? So small or large, as an IT shop, everybody's dealing with constraints on keeping up with stuff, with attracting and retaining the top talent, ongoing challenges, that you're facing in a number of areas and executing new projects or staying with the upkeep. And so for us as a company, we're here as a trusted IT partner. Obviously we got to have the knowledge, we got to have the expertise and the resources to be able to bring value to you, your team, your company. And today we definitely have that for you guys to benefit from with our EUC Practice Leads that we'll be sharing information, but also just we got to have the right solutions, right? We got to have innovative solutions. You need IT partners to have the right solutions that for today, but also strategically for tomorrow that'll fit into where you're going as a business. You want to work with people that have a consultative approach and good people, and so that's kind of the void. That's where we fit as an organization to help you out. And just a quick note: these are not professional paid actors in our photos. These are real people, as you'll see here in just a moment. So again, hybrid cloud solutions. So from the data center, the cloud service, all the way down to the secure endpoint. That's our focus, and that's where we're aiming to bring value to your organization, to your team. So again, technology acquisition. So we're if it's product, hardware, software, cloud services, we've got a number of innovative partnerships, advisory services. We'll recap a little bit. We've got a very, very valuable workshop that we've been doing for a lot of organizations, especially as they're looking at that modernized end user computing approach. That we've had an opportunity to help many of you, some of you that are on this call probably today as well. But then managed IT services we can kind of co-manage environments where you might have gaps, or you might have needs, and an awesome professional services team to come in and help you unlock new technologies, maybe do health checks and reviews, come in and do build and deploy projects where you might not have the resources. You want somebody else to come in and execute for you. So some of the core technology partners, just a quick glimpse for you, all the way, again, how you're delivering the applications, how you're accessing the applications, the underlying infrastructure supporting them, how you're backing up, handling DR, the endpoint, security, automation and testing. So a wide range, as well as reporting insights and handling high performance applications. So we have a wide range of applications and partnerships that we have to be of service to you and to your team and the solutions you might be looking for. I'll kind of highlight a couple here real quick. Nutanix, and again, thank you to Nutanix for joining us and being a part of this. We'll be highlighting a lot of their technology here today. We've been working with Nutanix for 10 plus years now. Fantastic expertise that we'll be kind of turning over to here in a moment, but helping customers that are looking into their technology and being successful with it. Citrix, obviously on the end user computing side, many of you may have some level of investment in their technology. A very, very long time partnership that we've had. 2021, we were their cloud partner of the year in the Americas. A number of our team on the are involved with the local user groups that are across the country as well. Just incredible expertise to kind of come in and be a partner to you and your organization. And then on the Microsoft, so Azure is where, as a team, we're more focused on and helping organizations to leverage Azure and what it's got for you and your organization. So we've got the ability to kind of come in and do different funded engagements, whether that be leveraging if you might qualify in your organization and the project you might be looking at, ESIF, so in customer investment funds. We also are certified to be able to do Azure migrate and modernize projects as well for end user computing migrations into Azure, and we've got some incredible expertise that we'll be kind of going through as well here today. So with that, I want to get things kind of properly turned over and introduce you guys to Scott Osborne and Shane Kleiner. Together, they co-lead up our end user computing practice. They put a lot of work into the information and the insights that you're going to see here today. I appreciate all their efforts, all their work, and kind of forward-thinking insights into kind of where you might be going and transitioning to that hybrid multi-cloud future, and helping you with maybe some ideas they'll play a role in that in the future. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the team, and thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Dana.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, so I guess I'll go first. Yeah, to those of you on here, I can't really see the list right now, but I've probably worked with the vast majority of you. Welcome, and thanks for showing up. For those of you who haven't worked together, I hope to work together soon. So as you can see, there's Senior Solutions Architect, North Central Lead I'm up here in Omaha, Nebraska. Recently minted, I'm kind of proud I got the Azure Solutions Architect here recently to match Shane over there. I do a fair amount, obviously on the Nutanix side, Microsoft side, Citrix, so on and so forth. And for those of you that do know me of any sorts, I'm a huge Detroit Lions fan. So, yes, that's behind me. That's my stuff. That's my gear. So
I knew you were a Lions fan, Oz.
Yeah. Certain days, right? Yep.
Right. Awesome. So everybody, again, thank you for joining. So I'm Shane Kleiner. I co-lead the EUC practice here with Oz, Senior Solutions Architect, Southeast Regional Lead, and also a Citrix CTP. I think we're going on almost 10 years now, believe it or not. I could see the grays coming in on the side. So Azure Solutions Architect as well. And then the most recently, I did the Azure Virtual Desktop. But I feel a little dirty, because I've been a Citrix guy for so many years. It's like, get the AVD cert, but it's also a great solution, right? Each one, depending on your use cases and whatnot. So also, I don't have the bottom line of certs like Oz here, so I decided to put my my certifications in TV. I got Apple TV, Netflix, as well as Amazon Prime. So
yeah, but for those of you that have watched this before, though, one did drop off. So
that's right. As the certs come back in, I drop off the TV. And more importantly, more than anything, Dolphins, right? You can see the pennant up there. Just got into football, believe it or not, my entire life. I just really got in last year, actually, and Oz bestowed me with that pennant there. So awesome. Thank you all for joining, and we're looking forward to getting into it.
Yeah, represent.
Yep. And so with that, we have a very, very special guest with us today, our very close friend and former colleague and also partner, Jarian Gibson from Nutanix is on with us today. So he's also, we'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself, Jarian.
Yeah, you got to get new picks because as you can tell, my hair is longer now. My beard is shorter now from that pick.
Jarian,
So
glad you brought that up. Nice softball.
We
for
can
that
fix that
right there.
There you
yeah,
go.
there you go. So yeah, my name is Jarian Gibson. I'm with Nutanix. I've been with Nutanix about 5 years now. I work on the EUC engineering team. I focus a lot on Citrix on Nutanix across our solutions portfolio. Do a lot of work on the Nutanix Cloud Clusters side as well, which we're going to talk about. I'm also a CTP as well, along with Oz and Shane. I think I'm like 12 years in. I can't remember. It's been so long. I'm also a Commanders fan, formerly Washington, formerly Redskins. So left hand up is a new motto for the Commanders. So yeah, starting the season off right.
2-0, right, Jarian? 2-0?
Yep, 2-0.
Yeah, and Jarian, just so you know, I knew you were a Commanders fan.
I know. I see the logo up there.
Mm-hmm.
He did not. He did not.
I know Oz knows.
I didn't know who they were, man. I thought it was like a Marvel Comics team. I'm embarrassed.
Bad. Yeah. So really glad to have Jarian on with us today. He's going to be kicking things off here. We're going to take a few moments to switch to his deck so he can go through kind of why we're here today, why the solution is so cool, and and what it's positioned for, and specifically with him working on the EUC front as well, kind of ties right into what we're doing. So we're going to take a moment. I'm going to stop my share, and then we'll switch presenters over to Jarian here. I don't know if I can give it.
Yo, beautiful.
There we go. There we go. Yep.
And we should be all good now, right?
Yep.
All good.
Looking good.
All right. So we are kind of moving into what looks like to be the new data center, which is going to be, basically hybrid multi-cloud. We're moving out of our own data centers and extending things out into the public cloud or bare metal as service providers or managed service providers like Choice Solution. So we're taking that and looking at, what kind of visibility we have, looking at things like latency and direct connect, looking at moving some applications to SaaS, looking at integrations, and then, what does workload portability look like? Can I easily move from my on-prem data center into the public cloud? And what does that look like from a, refactor, reformat, getting that image across, and especially from multiple clouds? And what kind of expertise do I need? So we're looking at that new data center. And so what we're doing with our Nutanix Cloud Clusters offering is basically making a true hybrid multi-cloud architecture. We're taking that same pane of glass, our Prism element, Prism Central, and our hypervisor AHV, and extending that out into the public cloud on bare metal nodes. We launched this with AWS, and then Azure we launched last year at Ignite. And so being able to take things like have workload portability, the same pane of glass management on bare metal nodes in the cloud, being able to have that license portability. So take your existing Nutanix licenses and move those into our cloud clusters offering, be on-prem today, be in AWS tomorrow, be in Azure the next day, or be across two or even all three, and have that license portability. You bring your public cloud accounts, and then you have our software on top of bare metal nodes with our AHV hypervisor, and that seamless workload portability. So think about this from a Citrix standpoint and taking your workloads, your persistent desktops, your non-persistent base images, and moving those easily from on-prem to one cloud provider to another cloud provider without having to refactor or reformat, and then have that same pane of glass with our Prism management across all those clouds having the same skill sets and the same constructs that you're used to today in a higher multi-cloud platform. Workload portability, as I mentioned, is the biggest thing, especially as we're seeing a lot of customers who are getting out of owning data centers for things like disaster recovery or needing to burst into the cloud when they have that demand of resources or they don't have the capacity on-prem to satisfy that requirement. So being able to easily take that, and whether it's our hypervisor with AHV in your data center, or if you're ESX or Hyper-V, you can still have those go across to our cloud clusters offering in Azure and AWS and to any other cloud we go to in the future. So you pick your infrastructure on-prem of your hardware of choice, and then you pick your cloud provider that we support to have that seamless workload portability across all. So as you see for Citrix and Nutanix, we are that true platform for hybrid multi-cloud, whether you're running the virtual apps and desktops control plane that you manage on your infrastructure, or if you're running the DAS control plane that they manage for you and just have things like the cloud connectors and so forth. And that extends across to whether you're in your data center or you're moving to our NC2, which is the nickname for Nutanix Cloud Clusters on Azure or AWS. So it's on your terms, right? So basically, you bring your cloud accounts into it. They run it in your cloud accounts, in your VPCs or your VNets. And then you pay the cloud provider for that. You pay us for the software. And again, easily run those workloads anywhere across on-prem, AWS, or Azure. And again, license portability and the same consistent operations as you were on-prem in your data center with that same pane of glass. Consistency is the big thing, right? Not having to totally learn a new set of skills. It's just our software, but instead of in your data center, it's in Microsoft's or Amazon's data centers on their bare metal nodes. So the same pane of glass, our same AOS and AHV that you have in your data centers. The main thing is that you're going to integrate with the cloud networking, whether it's on the VNets on Azure or the VPCs in AWS. And then again, have that license portability across with licensing. As far as feature highlights, you can be up and running within hours. So basically, once you get into our cloud portal, that is basically our foundation for the cloud. So if you're an Nutanix customer today, you're aware of the foundation process to deploy our nodes in your data centers. We have our cloud clusters portal, which is the same thing, but does it into the cloud. So you can be up and running within hours. The nice thing is you start off with the same as in your data center, 3 nodes, and then you can scale up or scale down to the maximum nodes that we support to 1 node at a time. Auto host remediation, if there's an issue, it's going to automatically bring a new node into the cluster, eject the bad node, and you continue running. We have things for DR cost optimizations and looking at things with our cost visibility and governance. Hibernate and resume. This is available in AWS, and I'll talk about that later on to help you kind of save some of the cost of compute when you don't actually need the compute. You can back that up to storage in the cloud. You can be procured pretty easily. Again, use your existing licensing, or we have other licensing options for the cloud as well. And then you pay the cloud provider for the consumption of that. Scale up and down, again, 3 nodes you can start with, and then you can go up to, both are now at 28 node cluster sizes. So up to 28 nodes, and then scale that up and down how you need to, and then be able to have that physical DC presence with those different data centers across the world that we support for both AWS and for Azure. Just-in-time strength and scale, so you can use our Prism Pro automation, or also known as XPlay, and have those playbooks to automatically look at things like cluster capacity and things like that. Use that low-code, no-code options to be able to scale up and scale down. If you see that cluster capacity is reaching a certain threshold, you can add more nodes into the cluster. You see it's below a threshold, you can shrink that cluster down. That way you can work on that cost management on those different signals for that. And that's all part of our Prism Pro offering with our playbooks. The next thing, auto host remediation. So it's going to automatically monitor the host health monitoring, detect those failures, bring in a new node, eject the bad node, and you're not going to notice anything. It's going to keep running. So that resiliency, that detection, that remediation, The cloud clusters nodes are automatically going to do that for you, whether you're in Azure or in AWS, and be able to keep running without any notice of downtime and so forth. And then Elastic DR. So you look at standard DR you could do where you have that full DR presence where that could be just sitting there waiting for an event to happen and you're paying for the cost of all that hardware. Well, what we can do is Elastic DR. So what it means is we have a lot of customers using this for DR, and what they're doing is they're setting up a small pilot light cluster, which gives you that footprint of a storage target. And then once they go into that DR mode, they expand that cluster out to the capacity they need and deploy more clusters to meet that footprint demand. So only pay for what you need and then expand out as you need it. And then I think Oz will cover this possibly too as well. We just launched our multi-snapshot technology to AWS as well to help you send that off to an S3 bucket and then rehydrate and recover that to our cloud clusters as well as another option. Hibernate and resume. So this is available in AWS. What this does is when you don't need the compute, you can basically hibernate the cluster. It backs up your data to S3. And then when you need the compute again, you resume that cluster and it rehydrates that from that S3 bucket. So depending on like disaster recovery, depending on your recovery point objective, recovery time objective, what you could do is have automation to periodically wake the cluster up, replicate to that, and then hibernate that cluster, and then do that depending on what your replication schedules are to protect that. If you have a more aggressive one, you might have the pilot light cluster. If yours is not as aggressive, then you might be able to go through and do the automation to do periodic replication to that, depending on the size of data and so forth, to kind of help you be cost effective for that. And that's available today in AWS and planned for Azure. And also we improved that as well to be able to have that improvement of the time to do that. We also support mixed hardware type clusters. And this is good for the Elastic DR solution I talked about. So we have those i3 nodes in AWS, which are more storage heavy. So you have a small footprint of those and use that as your replication target. And then as you go into a DR mode, you might just need the compute and not the storage. So then you start adding i3 nodes on top of that to meet your compute demand for that. So we have that mixed nodes where you can do the i3 EN and the i3, also the M15D and the Z1 as well. Also they can mix, but these two types can mix together as well. So depending on your requirements, we have customers that do that, where again they use the storage heavy nodes for the replication target, and then once they go into that DR mode, they use the i3 compute nodes to meet that compute demand. Cost intelligence, so you can see the actual visibility not only on-prem in your data center, but across the different clouds as well, to kind of see what that cost visibility looks like, and also have that chargeback and budgeting for different departments, and look at things like cost optimizations and saving that you can do. This is our product formerly known as Beam. It's now called Cost Governance, but that can help you with that visibility and be cost conscious for your environment. Our availability out there. So AWS, we have 29 global regions. We have 7 different types of hardware you can choose from, and we have 28 node clusters. It started off with 16, then 21, now 28. With Azure, we have 6 global regions, two metal types, and then this started off with 13 clusters, and now it's at 28 node clusters now. So we're there, and then you can move across to different our service providers, managed service providers, BIM models of service as well to expand that footprint out there. As far as what does that hardware look like, so you see here with AWS and Azure, we have those different types, and the storage. Some are all NVMe, some are NVMe backed by SSD, all depending. And then also too, we have models ranging from Broadwell all the way up to the new not Sapphire, but Cascade Lake options in there for the Intel models. If you do have a GPU requirement, we have those GPU nodes in AWS. So you have that requirement out there. And then also too, for Citrix, we have our RAs out there on our portal today for AWS with the i3 nodes, and then for Azure with the AM36P nodes that are out there. We are going to be doing our i4i testing here coming up to refresh that AWS reference architecture with Citrix. As far as Azure, so Azure, Microsoft holds all the keys of the kingdom pretty much. So in Azure, we have those same things for the higher benefits for Azure. You can get it from the marketplace. We also allow those extended security updates for the older OSs if you deploy NC2 on Azure. So all that benefits that you have with that apply to Azure as well with our Cloud Clusters offering. Our billing model is easy. So you pay us for the software, and then you pay the cloud provider for the bare metal nodes consumption. What does that look like broken out? So we have 3 different models. BYOL, so bring your own licensing. So if you already have Nutanix licensing, whether it's capacity based or it's the per user EUC/VDI licensing, you can bring those over. For EUC, it has to be the ultimate tier though for that. But those can be portable across that. And then you have pay-as-you-go and Cloud Commit. So Cloud Commit basically is a yearly subscription, and pay-as-you-go is a monthly. So when I talked about the whole Pilot Light cluster, if you're doing Cloud Commit, use that for the Pilot Light cluster. And then once you go into that temporary DR mode, use the rest of the capacity as pay-as-you-go, because you're not going to be committing that to a year. When you're in DR mode, that might be a month or months, so you don't want to have that year commitment to that. So you can mix that as well. Looking at that, what that breaks out from AWS and Azure. So we just added the marketplace for AWS. We also support BYOL in Azure as well. We were in the Azure marketplace at launch, and then look at the different types here for Azure versus AWS for the different options for the cloud hardware. Again, you pay us for the software, you pay them for the hardware. Our per user licensing model, so you license the number of users on the cluster, not the number of nodes. Doesn't matter if you have 3 nodes, 6 nodes, 32 nodes in the cluster. You just pay us for the number of users. So if you have 500 users across a large amount of nodes because they have high demands, again, you just pay for that number of users and that per user licensing for VDI EUC. Disaster recovery, and again, if you want to do disaster recovery into NC2 or use NC2 for anything with this licensing, you have to be the ultimate tier as well, but it gives you that flexibility. Our use cases, the 2 biggest ones are going to be for DR. So we're seeing a lot of customers getting out of having DR locations and using our Cloud Clusters offering for disaster recovery. And the other one too is going to be bursting rapid scale. They have that, need for could quickly be up with the new demand of usage, but they don't have the capacity on-prem. They use the cloud offering of NC2 for that. And then you have other cases like test dev migration. If you don't have that capacity on-prem, use NC2 for that, and then bring that back on-prem once that migration or test work is done. Our integration with Citrix, of course, our same plugins that we have for Citrix apply to our NC2 offerings. We use the same plugin that we use on-prem today for AWS. We do have a new Prism Central based plugin that is for Azure right now as well, but all the same integrations, same look and feel. It's just where you point to as far as Prism Element or Prism Central. For both, we are fully supported by Citrix, and we are Citrix ready. Take your base images, persistent desktops, even provisioning services into the cloud with our clusters offering. And again, it's the same look and feel as AHV. Our same plugin you use today, if you're using AHV on Nutanix, we'll use an AWS, and then Azure, we have that new Prism Central based plugin that just went GA for Azure. And then we have that use case for bursting. So I have a demo video out there where I go through and burst 2,000 desktops in under 2 hours in AWS to kind of show you that capability of how quickly you can get up and running. And that demo video basically shows you from deploying the cluster, replicating the base image, and then deploying 2,000 desktops in under 2 hours. I already had the VPN connected to my VPC to our lab, but everything else was done in that video, and it shows you that. So you can see how quickly up and running you can get with cloud clusters in the cloud. As far as licensing support, we fully support the new universal licensing or the on-prem term licensing from Citrix as well, if you're using the customer managed control plane. So both of those licenses work on cloud clusters, and they follow that new universal license subscription or the on-prem term licensing. As far as other licensing here, kind of the juggling here. So Nutanix, CBL, and VDI, and then also that Cloud Commit and pay-as-you-go. For Citrix, you're going to play, the on-prem term or the universal licensing. And then for Microsoft, it's going to kind of depend here. Of course, if you're on Azure, it's pretty simple. If you're on AWS, it's a little bit not as simple. So that's where you have to work with Microsoft and AWS to make sure that you are following the proper licensing guidelines for that. And you see here broken that out. It's not a technology challenge, it's just a Microsoft challenge. So make sure you follow their guidance on that for AWS. As far as the comparisons, so you see here, we have 7 node types AWS. We have 2 in Azure today. Azure does have some different networking. So we deploy Prism Central, we do the flow networking, we do VPC. So it's a little bit more different networking there, where AWS is directly into your VPC and no Prism Central requirements. AWS, we support their metal node types. And as they add more, we qualify those and add more node types. Again, we just added, like for instance, the I4I and another M model we just recently added to that. And then Azure, where you're doing a generally engineered solution. We have mixed node clusters in AWS and GPU nodes. We don't have mixed node and GPU nodes today in Azure. Flow and Prism Central is optional in AWS, where it's required in Azure. We're now in the AWS marketplace where we weren't before. We launched in the Azure marketplace that GA. If you have a GovCloud requirement, AWS, it's not there today in Azure. Both now support our Nutanix files. So if you're using that for things like your profiles or user data, we support files in both Azure and AWS. Azure was added recently. Hibernation is GA in AWS. It's not there today in Azure. The same PE plugin that you use today on-prem for AHV is the same in AWS. On Azure, our PC plugin that was in tech preview is now GA for Azure only. So if you just upgraded to AOS 6.7 and PC 23.3, that plugin is out there in a KB on our portal, and that KB will be updated with our PC compatibility and the plugin version compatibility as our APIs change. So this tells you with NC2 that time to cloud matters, right? You can get there in hours, not weeks or months. That same pane of glass that's on-prem, into the cloud, and then kind of compare that to a public cloud migration. A lot of use cases we see with customers where they've taken so long and spent so much money trying to get to the cloud, they come to us and we help them get there faster with our NC2 offering for that time to value. And then think about efficiency in the public cloud. So with us, we give you that full bare metal node, so you can customize your workloads what you need to. Whereas the cloud, if you want to go to the next model, or if you need a more compute size, you have to go to the next t-shirt size, and you may not need that full compute or memory. And so you're paying for possibly micro waste there, where again, you can right size on us. Doesn't matter because you're getting those full bare metal nodes, not slices like with the native instances. And then ours are all full NVMe SSD backed storage, where you have the different storage types. And then throughput, all of our stuff is going to be 25 gig plus throughput on those bare metal nodes. And again, that backed performance on storage there. So last thing here, hybrid cloud is here, right? So build a hybrid cloud in hours, not months. You can manage all as one with our NC2 offering. I talked about disaster recovery, where you can be up very quickly. Cloud migration with no change, no format refactoring. We have our TCO stuff. I think Oz is going to talk about that. And then again, it's the same software and the same licensing. Again, it's just taking our hypervisor and putting it on bare metal nodes in the cloud. And with that, I am done. So I'm going to hand the ball back over to let Oz and Shane continue.
So yeah, I was just saying thank you very much, Jarian, for the awesome overview of NC2 and kind of showing us both the technical pieces, but as well as the value add. So we're excited to kind of take it from here and also show some of the actual demos we'll get into in a little bit, but kind of show you the behind the scenes of what it takes to kind of build out this nice lab environment that we have to actually showcase this technology. So,
and real quick, Shane, I'll be here too on the rest of the call. So if any questions pop up or if you need anything else, let me know. I'll be here.
Perfect.
Awesome. Yeah, keep an eye on the questions, and yeah, thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. So what we're going to show you for what he went into, I mean, what it boils down to is, why is this so cool, right? So this is precisely so cool and so helpful, especially on the EUC front, because it gives us one hypervisor, basically one multi-cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud, one environment to manage, basically like you manage your on-prem stuff. So it reduces the complexity and everything else that he talked about from usually when you have to move to cloud, you got to learn all those constructs, all those things that you usually have to worry about redoing or refactoring or whatever. So you know, he talked about the slow, it really allows you to slow roll into a rehosting first and then refactoring and doing stuff, you know, after that, and slowly going into and utilizing some native cloud services, you know, on your own timetable, really. So what does our environment look like here? So we're just going to quickly show you on the Miro board what we built here for this presentation and what that looks like, right? So essentially, just some details behind the scenes real quick. We got Citrix DAS, VDA 2305.1, 2308 just came out, but I didn't see enough in that to have to upgrade last minute. Really what, you know, other things that make this work at the end is going to be auto scale tagging with the cloud burst capability there, zone preferencing from a Citrix standpoint. So those are the features on the Citrix side. And of course, the all-important, you know, MCS AHV Prism Central plugin. Those of you that are AHV customers today are probably familiar with the Element plugin. There's a Prism Central plugin that works with the NC2 piece on Azure specifically. We have some 3K nodes on-prem. You know, we got 2 different nodes. We're only using one of those clusters for this webinar, but we got a 4 node, 3 node cluster. And then, you know, Jaren mentioned the minimums for production. It's kind of nice though for the lab scenarios. We got a single node AWS cluster. We got a single node Azure cluster right now. So that's nice for these lab scenarios because it's cheaper. Makes things a lot easier for us. So we got the Z1D metal, we got the AN36 because we are in US East, not East 1 in this case. We got a couple Prism Centrals, and that's due to you got to have a Prism Central, which Shane will go over to in a little bit on the Azure side. So that has its own Prism Central because of the flow networking. And then we have a Prism Central on-prem that really the AWS and the on-prem clusters are all tied into. And we got the NCM, which is really the Nutanix multi-cloud management portal, is a feature there that we're going to show. Governance, which is Beam, Flow, Flow networking specifically, not really the microseg piece. Leap is a part of our demo as well. And then that includes those protection policies and recovery plans. We have Windows 10 22H2. This is demo only. You know, Microsoft will come get you for that AWS piece. Azure, we're good to go, but the licensing, that required dedicated hosts. And as you probably heard, this is all bare metal. It's not dedicated hosts there. So that's a whole different licensing situation. And then locations, we're Overland Park, Kansas is our on-prem AWS US East 1, and then Azure East US. And really that's what makes this cool, right? So we're truly across the board, 3 different clouds at this point. And what you'll see is we're actually taking an image and we've created all of our catalogs, and we're using this one image to send it up to AWS, send it over to Azure, send it back and forth and do what we want to do. Makes it real. We're not using Azure Migrate. We're not using Move. We're not using anything else to facilitate that. It makes it real nice. And then tying into that, of course, is, you know, just here is basically the cloud services where Azure AD is a big part of, Entra Identity is a big part of our, you know, identity piece that we're not really pertinent to what we're doing. But everything feeds up to Beam, right? Or governance, sorry, the rebranding. Everything feeds up there from a cost perspective. So I'll show that a little bit later. So that's a SaaS service that we have up there. So I'll be real quick on my side because my side is way simpler than the Azure NC2. Shane will be going over. But really what it boils down to, because of how AWS works differently from what the networking in Azure and the complexity there, I'm able to use on this side just native networking, right? So no craziness with flow or anything like that to make it all work. So really it's just, you know, we're in the East 1 region. We have a VPN gateway going back to on-prem. You know, we have a VPC, of course, with 3 subnets within there. And we'll show this a little bit later in the demo just to show what it looks like in the console. And then we have simply a cloud connector. This facilitates is also our jump VM. Our Windows 10 pool, of course, the Z1D metal. And then the hibernation, as Jaren alluded to, just goes to S3, which is super nice. So we have this AWS single node cluster up all the time for these webinars, pre-sales demos, all this stuff that we do. And 95% of the time it's hibernated, and I'll show you in governance, but literally it kicks it down to this S3 bucket, and we pay like $2 a day or something, $1 a day. So everything, including my VMs, flush out to that.
Less than a Big Mac. I actually don't even know what a Big Mac costs these days.
Yeah, it's pretty
What,
cheap.
$7 something.
Pretty cheap. Being a single node cluster, obviously it's a little cheaper, but yeah, I mean that's fantastic, and it works out real well for us to be able to show this stuff off. So on my side, that's essentially it. You got security groups and those kind of things, but just know that on the AWS side for the solution, it's all, if you're familiar with AWS already, nothing's going to be strange or different as far as how it plumbs in to the fabric on the AWS side. And then obviously on-prem, we have a Prism Central there, which I mentioned, which really the AWS and the Azure or in the on-prem stuff are tied into. So they're on, and in Nutanix world, that's considered a single site. So that is a single site between AWS and on-prem because they're managed via a single Prism Central in this case. And then yeah, so we'll switch over here. I'm gonna hand this off here to Shane here and see if this works good.
Handoff incoming.
Yep.
All right, can you see my mouse move?
Yep. So
All right, I am gonna remove the webinar from the left because it's tripping me out that I'm seeing both things at like my peripheral. But awesome, yeah. Thank you for that, Oz, going over the nice overview. As you mentioned, AWS is a little bit simpler, but even on the Azure side, you know, once you kind of understand some of the bits there, it does make it a pretty streamlined using the Nutanix multi-cloud management portal, which we will walk through what that wizard looks like. It will actually go and automate pretty much all these constructs that we're going to show here in Azure. We just chose to do it manually, and we have that in like bicep templates and stuff, or you can do an ARM template, just because we wanted specific naming conventions and we're sticklers with names. But outside of that, what you're seeing here, they'll actually, all this is pretty much automated outside of some basics around just if you need to extend your connectivity back to on premises. So what we'll show. Yeah, so what we're going to show here is basically just some of the high level. I know there looks like there's a lot there in the diagram. We just wanted to be detailed, but we're going to talk a little bit high level here, and then we'll go into each of these pieces as we walk through the portal. So first thing you'll notice here is the kind of the bare metal nodes. These are different than what you see, as Oz mentioned, on the AWS side, right? So these are custom built and designed nodes specifically with Nutanix and Microsoft. So they're different than what the Azure bare metal nodes are. So these are basically, you know, Nutanix nodes that are inside of Microsoft's data center and actually plumb directly into the Azure fabric. So you'll see this as a delegated service on your VNets that you create, and it's actually giving you a direct, almost like it's plugging directly into those servers. So we have just 3 on the diagram, but obviously in the lab we have 1 for what we did here. So, but what you have, it starts out basically you have two VNets. Essentially, you have a VNet, Azure VNet is basically it's a construct for networking and address space. Inside that VNet, you have subnets. You have a VNet for Prism Central management. In there, you have 3 subnets specific to Prism Central, as well as 2 subnets for the flow gateway, which we'll talk about. Think of that as a traffic cop. What comes in and out of NC2, your whole clustered environment, both internal and external traffic, all flows through the flow gateway. So we'll get into that in a little bit. So that has its 2 separate subnets and then NSGs on that to help control the traffic. And then we'll talk about what the flow networking is in a second. There's another VNet there for the cluster, and that's where all your clustered nodes essentially go. And then basically there's NAT gateways. That's another Azure construct basically for, you know, snatting or giving you the egress internet access directly for, you know, NC2 talking back to the cloud portal and things like that. And then you have this concept of overlay networking. So similar to what you see within Azure or AWS or GCP, you know, Nutanix has their own networking capabilities, right? And so there's the microsegmentation piece that everyone knows about, but they also have kind of deep networking capabilities that allows for what's called overlay networking. So essentially on top of the cluster, Prism Central is kind of the heart of that. And you can create these overlay networks. So we call VPCs, virtual private clouds. So we have basically a transit VPC for traffic coming in and out. And we have a VPC that we created for Citrix for our lab environment, where we have basically a servers and a VDA subnet. And we have what's called no NAT and NAT. And essentially what that means at a really high level is basically, you know, no NAT is essentially any traffic leaving the cluster. It's not natted, right? So it allows you to easily come back as well as allow you to make inbound requests, right? So think of it like from a Citrix perspective with a cloud connector and a VDA, that's bidirectional communication, right? That cloud connector needs to know how to come into that cluster. So you want that egress traffic to be no NAT. A lot of the other stuff, you know, if it's not traffic that needs to talk to things outside, you can do the NAT base. So you have options there, and that's just you know, a option when you're setting things up. But then we basically have that.
Just add real quick too, and just to be clear, anything Citrix connecting back to on-prem, you definitely want no NAT.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. Yep. And so what we have in our lab to basically simulate that, what we did, because we need to get back to our on-prem or our OP lab, is we basically have over here, we basically have peered into what we created was called a hub here. And so we have a hub VNet that we have peered into the two VNets there for Prism Central and the cluster VNets, and then we basically have a gateway subnet. So using a native Azure VPN gateway, we also have a Palo NVA inside of Azure. We're just doing a VPN gateway inside of Azure, and essentially just sends that traffic. We basically just call that out, and it sends that traffic over to OP. So we basically have full connectivity for our on-prem domain controller that's there, all the way back to our cloud connectors, which are sitting over here outside of the cluster. We could be on the cluster or off the cluster. In this case, we were off the cluster. And then that's all kind of plumbed back in through peering. And then the missing link there basically is what you have here, which is called a route table or a user-defined route in Azure. And that basically tells how that traffic gets back, is that user-defined route on that subnet or Citrix infrastructure VNet or subnet basically says, hey, if you need to go back to this 10.230, essentially, right, you're going to go and your next hop is the external interface of the flow gateway. So anyways, that's a high level, and that's basically how we have the connectivity. So all these things that I showed you, we'll walk through what that looks like in the Azure portal. They're all sitting inside of a specific resource group for NC2, which you'll see there, inside of our and kind of our lab subscription that we have. So that's a little bit of an overview of kind of what the pieces look like from a diagram standpoint. And then we're going to basically go ahead and switch over to kind of showing back to Oz, you know, taking us through the journey of how we got our image on-prem and bringing it back up to both Azure and AWS. And then we'll get into the portals and all that fun stuff.
Yep,
Just a reminder before we kick that off, if there are any questions as you're seeing this stuff, please drop them in the Q&A. You have the three of us here to answer those. So.
Yep. So I'm going to get switched over here. Give me a second. But really what we're going to go through now is what does this cost me? Bottom line, you know, how do you compare this and figure out, you know, what's better, right? So I'm going to go into a scenario that is fictitious, but it's realistic, right, from an EUC standpoint. So there's a couple different tools that we put together for this purpose. Let me just get up here. So it boils down to, you have Nutanix has their own tool to help on that side. So we combine these two together to really, you know, make sure that the costs are Azure native, for example. That's the one we're going to go over today because we're EUC focused, versus, you know, their TCO tool. We kind of pair the two together, and we'll give you realistic numbers on a realistic situation that's fictional on my side, because I want to illustrate, like, I'm using in one scenario ephemeral disks, in the other scenario I'm not, but it's still, it's like a everyday conversation for us on the Azure EUC and Azure side, versus, for example, Shane's going to be going over a actual customer scenario that we just did from that standpoint. So I'm going to go into, from the main dashboard, I'm going to go into the TCO tool here. It's basically a direct cloud savings tool that helps us. You know, we got the Ozzy and Shane Corp situation going on here. So
we are giving out stock options, so you know, sign up.
Yeah, they're gonna be pretty worthless, but you know, get on that.
Gotta start somewhere.
You gotta start somewhere, baby. So in this case, for example, as you can see here, I'm going to set just a quick step through here. This is just a general administrative user scenario, right? So it allows me to plug in some of the details, like, okay, a lot of our customers are, especially enterprise one, I'm going to do some 1 year reserved. We don't have a lot of them bite at the 3 year reserve. So 1 year reserved. In my Azure cost estimations, I'm going to do what's usually we end up doing, where there's a minimum amount that might be 1 year reserved, but then the rest are pay as you go. And the TCO tool, really, I can just set it one way. So it's more, it's a lot of features being added, but it's more static as far as some of the things I can change here. So we tell it the region, we're going to go with medium workloads, right? And for the EUC, the medium workloads really shines for this. And that's because some of the other workloads that automatically boost them up, like Alter Disk and those things meant for databases, for high performance, low performance. The medium is really the sweet spot for us, which allows us to basically control the inputs, which are the important part, right? So in a normal situation, we would get like a RV Tools or a Nutanix collector data. And we could really then plug in those details on what we're using. And where this really shines is again, goes back to the whole t-shirt sizes, right? So you get a shirt, maybe it's tight around one area, so you go up to the next size, but then it's like baggy everywhere else. Shane has plenty of experience with this.
I do. My wife wants me to be extra large. I refuse it. But yeah, those Instagram ads, they got those shirts. If anyone tried them, definitely comment. They talk about the shirts where it's real tight up top, but loose in the middle. I haven't tried it. I think it's a gimmick, but just FYI, it's really important. Sorry, go ahead.
So this is like the perfect shirt is when we're getting into the NC. So we tell it our oversubscription ratio, because again, now we can do oversubscription on NC2. You can't do that on Azure AWS. Like, you're stuck to where you're stuck. So again, it's just a native cluster then, just like you manage on-prem, where you're thinking about what ratios do I feel comfortable. In the EUC side, that's going to be anywhere from us for, when we're doing single session desktops, from 3 to 6, depending if there's GPUs involved, non-GPUs, so on and so forth. I did a 5-to-1 for this one. 5, 6, 7 didn't matter as far as how many nodes on the Nutanix side from a cost standpoint. These AN36 are dual 16 cores. They give me 36. So it's basically just math at that point. So 5-to-1 storage efficiency is basic, what we see a lot of times. vCPUs, my actual workloads are using, came in at a tick over 4. Right, so that's what boosts us into this next instance, which doesn't fit perfectly on one side or another. I'm using too much memory or too much CPU for no matter if you go compute optimized or memory optimized, or in Shane's case, he'll show the storage problem. Memory, I was a tick under 16. Storage is like my gold image. I'm using about 85 gig, 450 IOPS. So those details go into the cost factor, and what it boils down to is, it comes up, I throw all that in, it says, okay, and this is the good scenario for me, because I matched it up with me doing it manually, is an F8S V2, right? It's because I'm using over 4 vCPUs, it boosts me up to 8. There's no other middle ground, and that gives me the 16. So then I'm at 7 nodes on the Nutanix side, and basically the big lines I'm doing is just the public costs, the public monthly costs, which then gives our 5-year cost. And then we have some migration costs, which really just us. I'm going to show you here on the PowerPoint what it boils down to. But it basically is us. Let's say we're helping you, or you're doing your own. You got a week of migration services. It's going to be less for native, or more for native than it is for if it's just AHV everywhere. So, really on that, what it boils down to, and just to show you on this, is for me, for example, when I come up with the numbers, and I'm going to show you the Azure estimate in a second, I got in blue here, my monthly public costs, for example, they come up with 52,076. I do it on the Azure cost estimator. It's actually 37,407.20, just to show you there's no black magic in our numbers. Based on, again, I did 100 1-year reserved. I have more flexibility. I did 250 desktops total, 250 or pay as you go. Our 5-year cost then is down to 2.2 here, not 3.3 like it comes up with the tool. The Nutanix side was legit with the 7 nodes, 36p, which is East 1. We just, in our lab, we're not in East 1, so we can't use the 36p. It gives you more resources in the East 1 region. There's Nutanix software obviously involved in the Nutanix. There's none on the Azure side. Nutanix software can be a multitude of things, right? So I did math based on EUC licensing, which they kind of hurt themselves on this tool. They don't allow you to plug in VDI or EUC licensing, or like bring your own licensing if you had spare capacity. So they hurt themselves a little bit on their tool. The EUC licensing didn't work out in my case. It was 531 using the new per user MSRP, what's going to be September 30th. So it's actually, I'm going to stick with the CBL licensing. That's NCI Ultimate 458, 741. And then what it comes down to, as you can see, is, over 5 years, just nominal migration costs. I did the 68 here. We got 2.3 and 1.6, which is really nice. And this is the East US 2, again, 100 1 year reserved, 5.1 CPU, so on and so forth. E1 identity disk, which is the really small P10 OS disk, because I'm assuming in this one that I couldn't use ephemeral because that's 64 gigs and you got to fit within there. NCI Ultimate Hub Benefit and MCA Sub, right? You can plug in also, you can have the TCO tool say, Enterprise or the Azure cost estimator if you have an enterprise agreement. So flipping back to where I was, just 1 second on the NC2. I'm going to go back to the cost just to show you this real quick. And let me log in here. And again, just to show you the ephemeral one was a little cheaper, but it was still more.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, the ephemeral essentially is the built-in disk, non-persistent disk that's part of the Azure hypervisors,
Yep.
right? So you're essentially not paying for that versus premium storage that you'd have to pay for. So in some cases, that's 20, or you'll see in mine, that's a lot. That's
Yep.
double. Yeah.
And just to show you that I'm not doing anything funny, like this is what we use all the time, right? So I did 100, as you can see, and I'm not doing the license included, which is way more expensive. Most of the time, enterprise customers you're doing the hub benefit, 1 year reserved for those 100 machines, like I mentioned, F8SV2. It does that. The P10 disk for 100 of those, you got that. And then they keep trying to sell that. And then, we got the other ones that are 150 as pay as you go. So we got our 100 base, and then we got our 150 pay as you go. Same thing with the managed disks, 150 of those. The managed disks add up. And then the not really small identity disk, but we wanted to be accurate. We always throw in the identity disks. Those are very small, it's $75. So there's my 37407 number as far as that goes. And then the other one, as you can see, one's 37407. The other one's going to be about 32, but it's still more than on the Nutanix side, which is really nice. Again, the reason this is because of the t-shirt size scenario. So this one was 32,927, and that's when you're doing these managed disks, and I got 0, right? So just the ephemeral you don't have to have a disk. So that makes that really nice from that scenario. So back to the presentation here. Let me just
To get an answer for those that are interested, Bill had provided. It's Classic Tees is the name of the t-shirt brand, Oz, in case you're wondering.
Okay, thank you.
Proper.
There you go.
That's very important.
What the folks very important. So take that down. We don't have a QR code.
No.
So on this, really, if anybody likes bar charts, here you go. It's 2.3, 1.6. That's the non-ephemeral. But as you can see here, a lot of times it's what's my per user per month, right? NC2 was 110.72 over 5 years. Azure Native was 154 with a P10 disk. But ephemeral is 131.71 over the 5 years, right? So it's still per desktop, per user over the 5 years, 131 versus 110. A really nice value there when you're comparing the two. And that's, again, we use that TCO tool. It helps us get kind of the Nutanix costs in place. And then we obviously go back to the Azure cost estimator to make sure everything lines up with the flexibility we have in the cost estimator that we don't have in the TCO tool. You pair those two together and it works out really nice. Especially, I'm sure you guys might have use cases where it's like, oh man, I need a little more storage or a little more memory or CPU than that last size, that last instance they have. Oh crap, that throws me up to a much higher instance now. And that's Shane's going to show that now. So I'm going to set up my share so he can show his scenario.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you for that, Oz. I'll go ahead and show my scenario now. And what Oz is really referring to is kind of that micro waste, right? That micro waste is essentially those pieces that you're essentially oversizing your environment and paying for this extra compute or memory, right? That you don't necessarily need in your environment. So what we have here, can everyone see, you can see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. Yeah, so I'm not going to go through the actual tool, but we'll talk through the inputs a little bit. Obviously Oz just covered all this, but we'll just show the main difference. I'll just cover the main difference here for me. So basically the scenario is there's 200 persistent developer desktops, right? We've all seen those in our environment. Those developers need those persistent desktops. In this case, it was basically persistent developer desktops where they had to have larger capacity on the storage side because they basically download these databases when they're doing these Tableau databases, when they're doing development and things like that. So basically, you know, at East US 2, so we had the AN36P nodes, 1 year reserved instance over here from a terms perspective, a reserve side of things. And then basically I did the custom workload medium performance for us, which was fine. So that's essentially the premium. You know, high is essentially ultra, which is really nothing that we're going to be doing in the EUC side of things. So if I go over here to my advanced inputs, you can see basically their current setup on the on-prem ESX environment was basically 2 by 16 is what they were at. And they were kind of pushing 2 pretty hard. They were running it, you know, hot on the 2 vCPUs. RAM was running pretty hot. So basically what we said is, well, you know, let's go ahead and add, you know, we basically put in our vCPU memory, and we wanted to have a good, you know, being developers, we actually were able to do a 2-to-1 ratio for these developers. Big difference here is if we take a look at storage, the capacity is 300 gig and the IO is about 1100 IOPS per each one of these desktops because they're doing that local rendering and their local database testing that they do. So with that said, basically coming and looking at the cost estimate, so I'll show this real quick and then I'll pop into the Azure cost calculator and you can see really where that big delta is and why it makes sense. Because technically, if we look, like if they're going Azure native in this case, man, an E4, right? So Azure, just like, you know, we talk about the t-shirt sizes on the Azure side, an E series is what's called, you know, memory optimized, right? So all these, the vCPUs always go, you know, 2, 4, 8, 16, et cetera, right? But then the memory usually follows the same way, but a memory optimized instance is typically double. So in this case, for E4 is essentially 4 vCPUs by 32 gigs of RAM. So that gives them a really nice, comfortable fit. You know, if you were, you know, basically if you're going on the Azure side, you know, probably a little bit oversized on the memory, but the CPU, 4 vCPUs is kind of where we want to be. But maybe, you know, 3 would have been fine, but we can't do that on the t-shirt size. So, you know, our perspective, what we really need was the boxers, right? The storage. You know, if we're talking t-shirts, boxers, you know, that's the storage there. Made that up. I'll quote that. We'll put trademark on that. So basically the storage is not 256, it's 300. And in Azure, it goes 256 and it jumps to 500. You don't have that middle ground, and it's double the cost for each one of these desktops. So we take a look at what we require here, 7 nodes, the AN36P nodes. You can see the monthly cost here of each one of those nodes is about 17K. You know, for all 7 nodes is 17K. And if you take a look at the E4S, right, the 200 of those desktops, essentially, right? Each one of those is a separate desktop. We're doing 1-to-1. We're not using Windows 10 multi-session because they're dedicated desktops. About 38K. We'll skip over the public cloud costs. We'll talk about the 5-year totals here. You can see it's a pretty significant difference. You know, going, you know, Azure native versus going you know, NC2 on Azure. Pretty significant cost delta there. We'll take a look at the slide and go through that here in a second. But yeah, so I wanted to show this, and I want to show you really what it looks like if we go over here and actually click on our price calculator. You know, just as Oz mentioned, you know, the direct to cloud comparison tool actually hooks into the Azure APIs for the pricing calculator, so it's pretty accurate. The reason why ours is a little bit different, we included the identity, just again, smaller cost. You know, this doesn't include things like you know, profiles, right? Azure stores, but again, that's smaller cost in the grand scheme of things. But we have basically the, you know, the 200 desktops here. You can see East US 2, the E4DS V5. Essentially here is what we have over in Azure. And if we take a look here, we can't use an ephemeral disk because we need persistent storage, right? We can't use non-persistent. These are persistent. Azure hybrid benefit. But the big thing here is on the managed disk side of the house, right? You take a look at going on the you know, the Azure side, right? We were 300 gig. Right? There's no 300. It goes from a P15 that's 256. That would be 6,900, right? For 200 desktops a month. you got to jump all the way to a 512, which is double, a little bit more than double the cost per month, right? So that really, so we're talking t-shirt size, as I mentioned, this is the boxes, right? This is the storage. We're looking at double the cost because we can't right size the environment, not having access. These are essentially giving you like nodes like you would have on your on-prem data center. You have a lot more control, not to mention performance, right? You're getting dedicated performance, local NVMe storage versus the shared backplane that you're getting on the Azure world. So that's another important piece there. And we have the identity disk, like we mentioned here as well. And essentially that 3812 is on the is on the pricing calculator there for the monthly cost on the Azure side. So flipping back, I guess, Oz, back to the deck on your side, right? Because you're going to be the main share of the deck, or I could, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, okay.
Actually, it's probably easier. Yeah, go ahead and do that because we'll be back on the deck. Yep.
All right, go ahead and stop your share.
Yep, go ahead. So, and we wanted to take the time to go through these TCOs because you might say like, oh, it's more expensive. But like when you actually dig into the details and the specific use cases that make sense, it's actually more cost efficient. And the biggest thing, as Oz mentioned, I'll keep reiterating it because it really is just not having to relearn your institutional knowledge that you know of your local environment, how you manage it today. You don't have to relearn that for Azure and AWS because there's a lot of time that goes into that and to do it right. Governance is a whole different world in the Azure side of things. So taking a look at the kind of the summary here, basically, we had mentioned 200 1-year reserved virtual desktops. This is kind of the summary. Basically, you're looking at 130 for the NC2 is 137, 90 per user per month. That's a 5-year total, right? And then basically going Azure native is 195. So you're essentially being able to keep that same Nutanix environment what you're used to today, and you're able to use that on top of Azure. And you can look at using our bar graph. It's a significant difference, which is actually pretty cool. And a big bulk of that in this case is on the storage side. And we're able to have local NVMe storage here. So yeah, that's kind of a summary of our TCO scenarios, kind of showing the business side of it a little bit. Now we're kind of roll the sleeves up and get into some of the technical demos, which is fun. My sleeves are already rolled up here. I don't have sleeves to roll up, but
yeah. So we'll get into real quick. We're a little behind, so I'll try to be quick here. Sure that. A lot of stuff I'm juggling between here. So just to show the Prism Central side, I'm not going to go into details here. I noticed we didn't put it back in our category, Shane, so it failed. But we have basically the things that are all bringing the master image over is essentially a combination of recovery points, recovery plans, basically the protection between on-prem and the Prism Central in Azure and on-prem and AWS. So I have two here in a single site. I got the Prism Central up in Azure. That allowed me to then fail over the master image, create a catalog, do what I want to do there, fail it back to and from. Makes it very easy, as far as that goes. And that's all starts in my Prism Central. And then, Shane will show you the Prism Central on the Azure side. But essentially, we're replicating between two sites just for the master image purpose here, right? Just to create those catalogs, get what we need to do in each catalog when we update them. Very simple, very easy to use as far as that goes. That's all, part of the availability zones, of course, is part of that. And again, this is a little bit having a problem here, but.
And real quick too, so the protection policy piece is if you want constant, like scheduled, updated, your image moved across from one to the other. You can also just take a recovery point and then do on-demand replication as well if you want that image update to be like right now. Yep. Or if you don't want to do it scheduled, you just want to do it right after you update it, you can take a recovery point, push it over automatically. As long as the pairing's done and the availability zones are there, you can do on-demand pushes also.
Yeah. And like I said, the Azure Prism Central, again, it's all Prism Central. From a Nutanix standpoint, it's Prism Central, like they're both just Prism Centrals, and it's AHV under the covers, so nothing changes. Again, that's the nice part about this, is that the management of it, the look and feel of it, everything's the same. Going across to public cloud for this scenario. So that part is all one and the same from a Prism Central standpoint. We don't really, I guess, have to see necessarily, Shane, the Prism Central Azure for this.
No, yeah, I'm going to skip that piece. Yeah.
so what it boils down to, and I'm going to go into their tool.
You're on the cloud management console.
Yep, I'm going to go into Cloud Management Console here. So the tool they have is the NCM. So this allows us to actually build and control and do stuff natively with the clusters that we have within Nutanix's dashboard. You saw I just went for my Nutanix, and I click into here. We have our 2 clusters here from the AWS standpoint, just to show that. It shows the running, what we got going on. The nice part about it is you have actions up here. I could update the configuration. I can't in my case because it's a single node. But I could update the configuration, the capacity. I could add a node, simple as that. I could reduce if it was a 3 node. You can do all that. You can terminate the cluster. You can do all that from here, so that any of that control would not be in your public cloud, but would rather be here for where you would control that, which makes it super cinch. As far as my sense, like for example, to create a cluster, once you have, some of the basic prereqs in place, it's as simple as telling it to go down here, what region, cloud provider, professionals, basically your cloud account, what it is, how many nodes, your networks that you can pre-create, which we did in our case, pre-create your key, your access, but that kind of stuff would be in place. So if I just pick our existing key, this is where you can easily tell it your AOS, your licensing, the build. We did 6.7 Pro Ultimate, that kind of stuff.
Also, to that first screen where it popped up where it said General VDI, that determines what license you want to use too. So if you picked VDI, it would show you a VDI option there instead of the NCI AOS licensing.
Yep. Yeah, so that goes back to the whole TCO, and if you are doing VDI licensing, you got to figure that into the other scenario of cost from that standpoint. So that's as far as the again the AWS cluster. I'll let Shane take it real quick, kind of show as far as anything specific. The only difference, Azure, there's no Hibernate right now, right? So the Hibernate's coming; it's a roadmap feature, so you're not going to see that as an option within the Azure side of things, but that will be there. Other than that, they're really going to be the same look and feel going forward in the MCM portal for what you can do. And then Shane, if you want to quick switch over to you for the NCM, and then you can show.
While he's switching real quick too, the first thing you do once you get into that portal is you add your cloud accounts and enable which cloud regions you want to go to. You can pick specific regions, or you can enable all regions when you add your Azure and or AWS cloud accounts.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks for jumping in on that, Jarian. And so real quick on the Azure side, I'm just going to show you, just in interest of time, this is a resource group. These are all the resources that basically created. Yeah. So I just wanted to show you just what it looks like. So if you do show hidden types in node, you can actually see this is the bare metal node. And so you can track costs and things like that. So that's the bare metal node. And you'll have things like in here, such as like the flow gateway, as we had talked about, that's an Azure native VM. And that all traffic flows in and out of this, right? So it has 2 network cards these are the 2 for internal and external. So you see we have in our NSG, we allow that traffic in and out. So all those pieces in Azure, that's all automated through the MCM, the NCM portal that you see here. So when we go to create a new cluster, essentially, if I click next, and I go ahead and we'll just call this, choice webinar. I change this over to Azure on this side, change it over to East US 2. I can say, up to, I think it's 28 nodes, right? I can choose my RF factor, choose the host type. And then here is where we can basically, because I already have stuff deployed into my existing VNet, I'll just say to create new just for a second here. We'll just call this choice cluster, choice webinar. We'll go ahead and pick your VNet. Those are the 2 VNets that we had talked about, right? So we'll just leave this here just to move over to the next one. Put DNS in there just so we can get moving and just show you. So you'll have AOS version. So this is very similar to what Oz showed, right? So there's no difference there. The difference becomes here on these VNets, right? Going and creating those out. So I'll just put 10.1.0.0/16. And then we're going to basically use the same key. This is the big difference is the flow gateway, right? So basically based on sizing, how much traffic is going in and out of that NC2 cluster, you can choose that here. We'll go ahead and build that out, and we would just hit the create button, and it'll actually go and build everything that we talked about, all those Azure components, the flow gateway, the NAT gateway, the VNets, the peering, all those pieces get done. Node gets built 100% automated. And that you saw there. And this is us kind of up and running using, this is our Prism Central. As Oz mentioned, we won't go through this, but I can just quickly show you how the VPC is, our Citrix VPC and our subnets that are associated with that are all right here. And that's how we were able to get that all kind of up and running on the Azure side. So yeah, that's basically on the NC2 side of things on Azure. Those are kind of the two quick things we wanted to show. We want to be able to swap over to the DAS or Beam, and then we're going to do the
real
DAS.
quick, just 2 minutes. How do I get insight in my cost? Well, they have that too. It's SaaS model. They have the cost governance, the governance piece, Beam. Just to show you real cool, before we threw up this cluster and started getting ready for this demo, as you can see, my spend for hibernation with my VPN gateway and all that was very low, right? $3 a day, including all that stuff all in, as I was flushed the S3 buckets. As soon as we kicked up the cluster, as you can see down here at the bottom, it went from 45 bucks that first day to now I'm averaging about 100 bucks and change going forward. So you have all that analysis, that cost billing in also the Nutanix tool for that, which is the governance piece here, which then plumbs into also your on-prem, and that just needs to be AOS based on-prem like HV or Nutanix, but it has to be Nutanix clusters on-prem. But that allows us to get a one-stop shop. I actually have all that on-prem plumbed into this too, but I can't show it because it has all of our various nodes for our cloud in there. But what's kind of nice is you can also do right sizing within here, right? So in our case, kind of funny, but it's going to tell me that our cluster, our single node is it's underutilized, which it is. We only got a few VMs running on it, right? So it's going to basically tell me where I could save money and hey, do something about it, right? So if I had a bunch of other VMs and wanted to be able to one click, I could do that from Beam, which it gives you all that capability of doing playbooks, automated playbooks, and some serious cool stuff there to help you manage and keep controls around that, which are hugely, vastly needed as you move to public cloud, right? So what does this all mean in the end, right? What this means, and I'm just going to show this real quick, is from our Citrix perspective, we have a single delivery group with AWS, Azure, OP, different catalogs in the same delivery group. As I mentioned at the beginning, what goes into this is auto scale, tagging, so on and so forth. So this, I just went fuzzy here. I don't know what happened. You guys see that too?
Yeah, I see it too. And while you're looking at that, there's a question about the TCO.
Yeah, go ahead and answer that. I have no idea what happened here with that.
You want to take that one, Shane?
Yeah, so right now the cost is just using the native Azure APIs. So it's going to be what the current public Azure costs are, but you can basically I would look at it from that perspective as basically just getting and helping with the sizing of the Azure instance side of things, and then we can be similar to what we did with the native Azure cost calculator. We can basically use that to add in your discounts essentially. So we can help to get close to where you would be, and also working with the Microsoft team to get you those discounts.
Hey, do me a favor, share yours for the workspace, the DAS console, because this went fuzzy on me on our shared workspace. We use Edge workspaces for our stuff, and for some reason it went fuzzy for me. So, yeah, so you can just show like the what we got for the auto scale.
You show the tagging, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go.
We have the public cloud nodes set with a tag of NC2 for both Azure and AWS. So on that last slide, if you notice, as you can see here, we're saying only auto scale the machines that are tagged with NC2, right? So only the public cloud machines. When I'm dropping below 60% on the on-prem stuff, which we have 5 in Overland Park, when I drop below that, which I have 2 logged in right now, so the number doesn't hit it yet. Shane's going to log in here in a second. As you can saw, all the public cloud ones, if you flip back to that, Shane, all the public cloud ones were off.
Flip back, yeah. So there we
go. So as you can see in here, we got all these unregistered and off, and we got 2 people in. So as soon as he logs in as for a 3rd session, that's going to trigger that 60%. And then my peak, so I'll let him do that in the background. But then I also have peak load balancing or peak power management auto scale policies then that say, basically 8 machines. I need to have a 75% or whatever, then that kicks in. So what it does is it does not allow any of the NC2, your Azure spend or your AWS spend. It doesn't allow any of those to spin up and start incurring costs until you hit so many of your on-prem ones that are being used. And we don't have to do anything with that. So basically he logs in, we should see this.
I'm all logged in here.
Yep, so we got 3 of us logged in. Once it figures out the 3 are logged in, one of these will, if the demo goes according to what it should go.
It takes about a minute or two to
Takes a
realize.
minute or two, and then it starts kicking up at that point, is what we're hoping to see. Or not.
It does take a few minutes to realize, right? And
Yeah.
so we'll give it a few minutes. If not, I will do the simple, I will pause the screen. I'm going to start all the VMs, and then we're going to say it all started up.
I'm gonna make
No,
sure.
but give it a second though. It does, yeah, because it is analyzing essentially. If you come back in over here, as Oz mentioned, right, it's using the logic here, right? And this is set to right now, peak times 4. We're between 9 and midnight, so we're good there. 4 is up, set 60%, so should be good to go. Yeah. Let's go back.
The difference is we took our cloud connector down in one of the regions overnight, but yeah, okay, there you go. So it is on. So
It takes about probably less. I know it's been about 3 minutes, right?
and
So
I promise I didn't do those manually on my side.
I don't know. Let's go look at the tasks and see if Oz is telling the truth. No, I'm just kidding.
Essentially, yeah. So it figures it out. The on-prems are used, and then it starts booting up. And what it'll do even more nice than that, like what's pretty cool, is because we got 2 catalogs in AWS and the Azure one, it splits them. So if you'll see, there's an on one in Azure, and there's an on one that's going to register in AWS. And what it does now is it says, okay, you've now gone below your threshold for on-prem and that 60%. Now I'm going to light them up to get to your regular that you're probably familiar with autoscale, where I'm telling it I need so many free machines on my percentage on the regular policies. So it'll basically kick up to where we have 6 free machines then, because there's capacity buffer, which in our case is 10%, the default, which is 2 machines, 6 free ones. It needs basically 8 free ones at that point. So it's going to boot up enough to then cover the other side, the other policy. And then if I were to log off, and at this point we'll flip back to PowerPoint, but when I log off one of mine, it'll start essentially shutting them down. It'll be below the OP mark, which is our on-prem.
And that's the
60%. And what's nice, and just telling you what it does, is it'll go and it'll say, okay, you don't need your public cloud ones anymore, and it'll start turning them all down. So it does all that automatically. So different machine catalog, same delivery group. We're able to use AWS, Azure, thanks to NC2. It's all AHV Prism Central plugin and Element, which can sit side by side, by the way, on a cloud connector. And it makes it super easy to make sure that you're not booting up and using machines in public for that elasticity situation, that cloud burst situation. That you want to avoid, just having a bunch of machines sitting up there running, doing what they're doing, right? So that's the beauty where it boils down to where the rubber hits the road and where we're brokering desktops, and all of that back end stuff, what it goes into is this, and controlling these and brokering 2 desktops where we're doing preference to home. And that's the other part of this. Under zones, there's a preference for a user. We got our users. So if you had a few booted up in different places, we got preferences on us. So we launch out of the OP first, no matter what. And then we would go to the other zones at that point.
Yeah.
So that's essentially that part of it, which is super cool. As you can see, we just got our regions and our resource locations and whatnot for Azure, AWS, and it works slick as
One thing too, I'll just real quick is basically that in order to do all that, essentially it's two catalogs, right? AWS, Azure, and they're joined within the single delivery group where those
three catalogs.
Three catalogs. Yep. Sorry. Yeah. We have the three catalogs all joined within the same delivery group. And
Yep.
so you can see that basically here. You see OP, AWS, and Azure, and then that auto scale is controlled. So it really is bringing that true story of, you know, the hybrid multi-cloud and auto scale and burst that's always talked about. We can do it with these technologies brought together, which is pretty slick.
And then once more of the APIs there, you could take that a step further and use playbooks with our Prism Pro stuff and look at the APIs and then hibernate or resume a cluster in AWS based on that capacity and spin desktops up, or just spin more desktops up on Azure as well, depending on the scenario. So you could get even more at that once all of the auto scale API stuff is there. That's one thing we're watching and looking at.
Yep. And then just some honorable mentions. Jaren mentioned at the beginning, multi-cloud snapshots, only AWS right now. That's essentially going to allow us to replicate a snap to NC2 into a bucket, right? They're probably going to be blob, obviously, on the Azure side when it's there right now, AWS S3. And then so we don't have to rehydrate our cluster, for example, a true DR. We don't have to bring up that cluster. How do we get our protection policies won't work if the cluster is not up? Well, we can use this multi-cloud to send stuff up there and then have it constantly replicating up to public cloud without rehydrating our cluster for those true active passive DR scenarios, that kind of stuff. Nutanix Central is coming. It's a .next announcement. I wasn't able to get this in early beta for me. I tried to apply for that. That's going to be a SaaS service that sits above all the Prism Centrals that we have. So let's say I had another one somewhere else, multiple Prism Centrals under one management console. That's going to be real nice. I'm excited to get my hands on that. NC2 on Azure, again, going to have that hibernations coming. GPUs aren't there. It's coming. More regions, more instances. That's all roadmap. And then files on NC2. And, you know, how do we get away from the cost of Azure files or AWS EFS? Well, you can run files on NC2. We don't have that in our lab. We got single nodes. Can't do it on a single node cluster. But as we expand out, for example, in our own 3-node in Azure, which we're doing next when we can actually hibernate it, we're going to have Azure files or Nutanix files on there, which then keeps that cost within our Nutanix cluster. And now we're not utilizing NetApp files or Azure files as a native filer, right? So that's really nice. Just so you guys know, we have a jumpstart for us for both Azure and AWS. You can see the details here, but now that we've been doing this for quite a bit for both of these, we've put together a jumpstart to help you guys out. You know, doing what we've done here essentially in the lab for your own workloads and getting you guys going. And then really just a shout out, you know, for us, thank you, you know, for coming today. Excel here in Omaha, Nebraska, for you peeps that are close by to myself, Jaren, Kansas City, Iowa. We got an Excel coming October 4th to Omaha. Shane's going to be presenting on session recording and analytics and all the cool stuff there. I'm emceeing with Jaren. So all the fellows will be there. We'll be doing our thing. So just wanted to put that out there. And then Ellie, did you have something you want to say about the questionnaire or whatever else?
I don't know if Ellie's still on, but yeah, just again, through post event, there'll be a link sent to you. Fill that out, please, and we'll get the information we need. Obviously, you know, a lot of work goes into these, a lot of time on your side as customers, as IT leaders, with a ton on your plates that you've taken time to join us. So any feedback on the event, the content, what was intriguing, what we could do better, please leave that in the survey. We would greatly value that. Thank you, Oz. Thank you, Shane and Jaren. Again, you can catch all three of them and others October 4th, right, up in Omaha at the CUGC XL, of which both Oz and Jaren are respective leaders and helping co-coordinate a lot of what you or your team might experience on that date. So thank you there. Yeah, no, a lot of great stuff, you know, with a lot of great momentum with Nutanix right now. If you've been following any kind of press releases and things like that, huge semiconductor Micron selected to go with Nutanix. They're building a $5 billion facility in Idaho, and starting from scratch, and want to kind of reduce a lot of previous complexities that existed in legacy technologies, and selected Nutanix. So that's a recent huge win. There's a competitor that had a competing technology that has kind of conceded and discontinued their offering, and inked, kind of announced a big deal with Nutanix as well. So if you don't have Nutanix, obviously we're planting the seed on the capabilities for the multi-cloud future and how it can play a role there. But definitely keep Nutanix on your radar. And when you do, we'd love to be that partner to help you guys out in exploring it, but adopting it and being successful with it throughout the life cycle. Wholeheartedly believe that our team would provide tremendous value all the way through the process and helping you guys successfully adopt it. Yeah, if there's any unanswered questions or things, obviously we kind of ran short on time, or thoughts, please drop that in the survey, and we'd love to set up a follow-up conversation or discussion with you to kind of talk through anything that was intriguing and the team went through in the process. And we'll also have some recordings of it as well that we can get out, see if there's anything kind of want to review or recapture, that we'll do that as well. So yeah, with that, yeah, Shane, I think.
Yeah, just wanted one quick note I wanted to mention, and it was on the Jumpstart slide, but I don't know, we didn't talk about it real quick, but it was just it's very non-intrusive to get this set up in your environment as kind of a proof of concept standpoint. It just requires that site-to-site VPN, and you can extend your environment out there, right, with trial licensing to be able to do some actual testing with this in your environment. So it's not multiple weeks of services. That Jumpstart's about, a little less than a week, right? And that's really something that if you want to get this, you want to test it in your environment, this is the way to go. And it being non-intrusive is pretty awesome. So yeah, Dana, thank you again for mentioning all those other things. But I just wanted to mention that real quick. So
awesome. Everyone, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. Appreciate your feedback on the surveys, and look forward to any kind of follow-up conversations that might be relevant for you.
Awesome. Take care, everybody.
Later.
Have a good one.
Go Lions.